bandits are also threatening the contractors that we sent to fix it, which is why we sought help of the NSA and the other security agencies. So, with due respect to the Senator, the northern blackout was not due to technical grid collapse. It was vandalization. And we have explored alternative routes of supplying power, which is the Bauchi route, which was also vandalized anyway, but that one is easier to fix. And we are saying within the next 2 to 3 days, there will be light restored to the north.
Oh, well, Kayla.
Yes, Auntie. Yes, Nelta.
How many times did I call you?
That too.
That's less than the number of times the national grid has collapsed. And you answered me those 2 times.
I mean, it's a shocking situation.
No.
I know with Nigerians have a way of making jokes out of everything. But this is not funny.
I beg to differ, Kayla. I beg to differ. I don't think they're making jokes. It's called it's a survival mechanism.
A coping mechanism?
Coping mechanism. Okay, that's what you want.
But it doesn't get things done.
Who told you?
It doesn't. Does it work?
Kayla, it does. That's why they're not dropping dead as they're walking along the road.
No, I meant get things done as in fixing the actual problem. It makes us able to cope with the problem, but it doesn't fix the problem.
So the problem, as someone said, the problem is not even the coping mechanism, but understanding that when you go to the polls, what you're doing is like you have a business and you employed somebody to come work for you. The person works for you, and you can ask, you are permitted by law to ask the person questions and to hold the person accountable. That is what the Nigerian has failed to do. He's ready to find a coping mechanism, crack the jokes, laugh about it, and move on, and wait for the next 2-3 years to go back to the polls. And when he gets to the polls, some of the Nigerians are willing to collect that 1,500 or some, I use some, and then look away and things happen. And then when they now come back to hold that person accountable, they're not able to. Because by the time you're coming to that, your employee, who's sitting in that number 1 office or number 2 or number 5 or number 6 office, as the case may be, is your employee, is your money that's paying his salary as allowances. So when you now come to him every day to collect money for school fees, money for funeral, money to do one thing or the other, when he's not doing the job you're paying him to do, you can't hold him accountable.
I mean, I think as a people, we have to move from the outrage to action. And when I mean action, I'm not talking about going out there and being violent or anything. We're asking the accountability required. A recent reshuffling was done of the president's cabinet. This minister of power has stayed in this office. How is he delivering on it? What's he doing? The reason why we say talking about the jokes that people are making is because we actually saw people say, no, they're asking that we should be giving some kind of award for the most power grid collapses of a country. You know, and then we also have to understand that the ramifications of these things on businesses, or on people's lives, on productivity. And remember that we have been put into bands. We're still trying to understand this banding that has happened. So I'm on band A, but I still don't have electricity. And it's because the grid has collapsed. So what should be done? And from what we're hearing from the Minister of Power, at least from the things that were said yesterday, there's a lot of recommendations that they have, and they're telling us to be patient because as these repairs and upgrades continue, there will be power loss. That is basically what we've heard from the minister from that meeting yesterday. But joining us right now to shed some more light on this conversation is Mr. Shola Adekanye. He's joining us from Vacaville in California. He's the CEO of Open Innovation Access. It's nice to have you on the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
So
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about these recommendations by the Minister of Power. We just had the embarrassing situation in northern Nigeria, 2 weeks without electricity. And then we're dealing with banding. And now the grid is collapsing more often than necessary. This is the 11th collapse this year. What are your thoughts on this situation?
Well, these are real problems, and they will unfortunately continue. Because really, to put things in perspective, the grid is outdated. That's number one. So it will continue to suffer inefficiencies. So energy loss during transmission. The second thing there is that the grid in itself, the capacity is way, 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 way too low for the population we have. Currently, the grid generates about 14,000 megawatts. I mean, that's nothing. And I'll put that in perspective for you. Maximum or peak demand of the grid this year alone is about 20,000 megawatts. But the capacity is about 14,000 megawatts. So we're already demanding more than the grid can even produce. To put things in perspective for you, for 200 million people, that's way too small. In California, where I live, California is about 40 million people, and it generates about 40,000 megawatts. And I can check it right now. Peak demand at this point in time, which is about 1 a.m. right now, where I am, is about 28,000. So there's excess capacity on the grid. So the grid in Nigeria is insufficient, way insufficient. So we would always find this excess load, excess demand of that grid, and it would always collapse. That's the truth about the current situation. Now, the good news is that many different projects going on. There's windmill projects going on in Katsina and also in Sokoto. Really, Katsina, there's a windmill project going on that's supposed to produce about 10 megawatts. That's still nothing, but at least it helps. There are solar farms going on in Kano, also in Delta State, that are supposed to produce, roughly about maybe 210 megawatts. Still not sufficient, but at least a little bit adds here and there, a little bit helps from here and there. But the reality is that the grid in itself is insufficient. We have small projects that are decentralized that are going on in different parts of the country, but are not exactly also going to add too much to meet the demand that we have in Nigeria. So from time to time, we would have these issues, happening because we just demand more than the grid itself can generate.
So there's this interagency committee that has been set up by the Minister of Power, Mr. Dilabu. And he talked about some repairs that are going on, and I want to be able to be verbatim. He says, the Shiro Mando axis, there's some work going on there, the Jeba transmission station, and the restoration of the second Ugwaji Ape transmission line. And they're reporting, the reports really from the Minister of Power is highlighting weaknesses in the transmission system. Just so I can understand, for the rest of us really to understand what that means. A weakness in our transition system. What does that mean?
So there's a lot of energy loss during transmission. It's just outdated. So during transmission, we're losing a lot of energy. So what gets generated is not what gets to the end use at the end of the day. So there's a lot of loss in the process. That's what that means. So, until that grid in itself is fully upgraded, it's not just about repairs, it's upgrade. It has to be fully upgraded to be able to manage some of the inefficiencies that we're seeing on the grid. Normally there's about 60% of all energy is wasted, because that's why on the back of your TV, on the back of any appliances, you feel the heat there. But what's happening in Nigeria is that off the grid, once energy is transmitted, you see during that transmission, you feel a lot of heat around all the different infrastructure, that wiring and all the other infrastructure transmitting that energy. And so that's really the heat that's really translating to the energy loss that we're experiencing during transmission. So what the grid produces is not what gets to end use. And that's really, the reality on ground. So there's much less. First of all, we're not producing enough. Second of all, out of the what we're producing, we're losing some of that as well before it gets to end use. So it's never going to be enough.
So to help us understand what happened with the last collapse, what we heard from the Minister of Power is that it was due to a sudden rise in frequency. What does that mean?
There's more demand on the grid than the grid can produce. The grid produces about 14,000 megawatts. Peak demand this year alone has been about 20,000 megawatts. So you can see we're demanding more, putting excess load on the grid itself. And the grid itself is older infrastructure. So there's no way it can really carry that much load. So that's why we're seeing some of the collapse that we're seeing, because it's never really meant to carry this much load. And there's more demand. The population has grown. You find more companies opening up in, the industries, different things that are opening up here and there. Even though people are generating their own energy, as soon as demand is still placed on the grid in itself, even with all that energy that are being generated by individuals, by citizens, there's still a lot of demand on that grid.
Dr. Adekanya, you mentioned where you live in California. You talked about 40 million people in 40 million population, and the energy generated or by the grid is about 40,000. I know that the new Power Electricity Act in Nigeria gives the state and indeed geopolitical regions opportunity to also generate their own power as well. So if in California alone, what do you think is stopping this the states from getting into this mix? Because even the power minister had suggested that, come on, we can have regional grids, we can have state-owned grids, we can have states coming together to form a grid that can serve each state. So what do you think is the reason why these governors or governments are not looking in that direction?
Well, I would say maybe it's priority. Really, it's not prioritized, right? That's number one. Although there are some projects going on at this point in time. There's a project going on in Katsina, which is a windmill project that is supposed to generate about 10 megawatts. That project in itself, at least, will serve some parts of Katsina State. The rest of northern states have they have prime locations for wind energy. But the question is still, that everyone's still asking is why are they not just taking advantage of the wind, consistent wind speed that they experience there and just put up windmills there. So the question still remains unanswered. You find solar farms. One big solar farm that was commissioned in Kano State is generating commissioned in 2020, generates about 10 megawatts. But still, that's not sufficient. But it adds to what we are currently generating on the grid itself. So a little bit helps. Ashana solar farm, also in Delta State, generates about 200 megawatts. So that's regional. It serves people in that state. And then Lagos State just recently started this project, this waste to energy project with in conjunction with this Dutch company to produce about 60 to about 75 megawatts. That's also on the way. It's not done yet. So we're starting to see state governments starting to take, action, into the renewable energy, because the grid in itself, it costs a lot of money to build a grid. So renewable energy, we're starting to see state governments starting to explore, into those areas and dabble into some projects in those areas. But they are either too new or just insufficient. They're not adding enough to be able to, they're not adding significant energy for everyone to actually feel the impact of those regional projects. I don't know if you heard recently that about the rural electrification, where World Bank awarded a credit to Nigeria or the Rural Electrification Agency, about $750 million. That could be put to a lot of good use. And I know that if put to good use could really help, significantly help. So we're seeing some regional projects, just not enough
Mm.
to make that impact that we expect.
So the rural electrification project, for instance, we know that it's been since it came up, they've done some significant work, but there are those who will tell you that there are communities, some rural communities, who are still not having electricity as they should. So again, the question of captive power comes in, the breakdown of the system as is as though there is a lack of, for want of a better example, a lack of a political will to actually unbundle the structure as is right now. Do you agree with that?
Well, I somewhat agree with that, but I also see some action going on. I mean, there's some tenders that have been released by the Rural Electrification Agency, inviting the public to bid for a project to produce alternative energy in 6 geopolitical zones, 1 megawatt each in each geopolitical zone. So that in itself is an effort, but it's a tiny effort compared to what we need, because 1 megawatt is like, it will add something, but just very insignificant something. It's not going to be sufficient, but there's still action. So we have to give credit for the action we're seeing. There's just not a lot of traction yet. We're starting to see some, just not enough at this point in time. So I wouldn't say that they don't care. Government doesn't care. I think the government is taking some action. I think the government certainly needs some help. I think the government, obviously, the funding has now come in here. So we expect to see more of, more traction in this area, where the government is issuing tenders and inviting the public and the private sector to join hands with the government to really bring in the expertise, to put real solutions on ground. So that's what we're saying, but it will take some time for us to feel that full effect of all these different initiatives.
Okay, so you see what you were talking about, there's action, there are some things that are happening, and indeed I agree with you, there are some things that are happening. There bids have been put out for people to come in to generate electricity in the 6 geopolitical zones, 1 megawatt and all that. Little here, little there coming together. But the picture being painted out there is as though it's going back to that national grid. But we're talking about a move away or an upscaling of the national grid if we're going to be using the national grid, or breaking it down to regional and state grids, so that we have energy sufficiency across the country. Because while all of this is going on, Nigeria sells power to neighboring countries that don't get blackouts. So it's as though there's a different grid for the other countries, and then there's a different grid for Nigerians. And then Nigerians, in less than a year, have had a collapse of the grid more than 9 times. So what do you think should be the solution? What should we be looking at?
Well, it must be moving away from total reliance on the national grid itself. We have to dabble into renewable energies. And I'll tell you one, so I just mentioned California. California in itself, has approved and gives incentives to households and communities to install solar energies. So you install solar in your home, the government gives you money, because it's just a tax rebate that it gives you to encourage and incentivize people. Now, once solar is installed, the government obviously now has a lot of storage. So you're producing a lot of energy for the government. Yeah, and using out of what you're producing. But in most cases, everyone produces in excess. And that's another way that the government is able to manage the capacity that the state needs. The state is the largest state in the country. So, it needs a lot of energy to meet its demand. So Nigeria needs to do something similar. We need to move away from total reliance on the grid to initiatives around the renewable energy. And we have to give some credit to some states that are already doing something in the windmill. Nigeria has a lot of wind, so Sokoto has consistent wind speed that they could take advantage of. You find the same thing in Kaduna, Delta State, River State, all these different states, they have consistent wind speed that they can leverage to put up windmills. 10 megawatts here, 20 megawatts here would help. Also solar farms. only about 2-3 states are really doing some major projects in solar. So the more of this sort of renewable energy, projects would help move us away from absolute reliance on the national grid. But each citizen, each state, each region could start to produce produce and store some of that energy on the national grid. Because right now, when to upgrade that national grid, I said, right now we are producing about 14,000 megawatts. To go to full energy sufficiency, to be able to produce enough energy for the country, we need about 200,000 megawatts. I mean, you're talking a lot of gap, a huge gap between where we are to where we need to be, and that's a lot of investment. So we need to move to these regional based renewable energy initiatives.
I want to find out. You run a power service, don't you?
Well, we are investing in a company in Abuja that does more of the storage and teaching people how to be efficient. Because part of the problem we have is not that the grid doesn't produce enough. We as a country are not even using energy efficiently.
Okay. Efficient use of energy.
Efficient use is not there as well, because we're wasting a lot of energy. One of the things that we've noticed, we've done a lot of research around this, is that a lot of times about 68% of all energy is wasted. So whatever comes to your home, about 68% of it gets wasted at the end of the day. You see many outdated appliances, older appliances, even the newer appliances or electronics only take what they need, and then they emit the rest as heat. So why should all of that energy be wasted? So what we are doing is to work in that area to produce devices that can capture that waste and send them to storage units. So that's the work we're doing. We've already gone through initial tests through NEMSA, Nigerian Energy Management Agency, to get that certified during the first stages. But then we're going to go back and then try to get second round of certification done. And then
I want to be able to get your thoughts on something else, because while we're discussing the grid collapsing and the repairs, what they've told us, and I want to use the minister's words, we're to expect intermittent disruptions as repair works begin on the grid. He said it twice. Instability is expected while repairs and improvements are underway. How do we juxtapose that with the fact that many of us are paying more? So it's almost as though for those of us on band A, we're paying for more electricity. We're paying more for electricity that we are not getting.
Yeah, so unfortunately that would still be there because the government is doing partial upgrade as they're doing the repairs. They're not just repairing old grid, they're adding some upgrades to it. And that upgrade costs money. So as they do the upgrade, someone has to pay for that. So the citizens have to pay for it. So if you're in band A or band B or whatever band you are in a way paying for some of that repair, some of that upgrade, and that's what you're seeing. But the good news is that upgrades are being done, repairs are being done. The not so good news is that it's still not going to be sufficient, because the grid capacity is still way, way, way below demand. We have 200 million people who, in many cases, many of us are not using energy efficiently. So, and then you have industries that are starting to spring up here and there, companies needing energy. At the end of the day, it's never going to be enough. We're still going to find cases where we have to individually produce energy through generating systems or in solar through these solar generating panels that we have. We're still going to be seeing some of that because it's still not enough to really get us to where we are fully sufficient. We would have to get to about 200,000 megawatts. It takes a lot of money to get there and a lot of effort to get there. It's a multi-year project to go from 14,000 to 200,000. So we need more of these regional projects. Lagos State also started this waste to energy more states need to do that because there's a lot of waste that we're generating already. Some of these projects are very expensive, but then they help. They help over the long term. They're cleaner energy. They're more efficient in transmission. So some of that waste that we're experiencing in the transmission of energy from the grid will not be experienced through these renewable energy projects. So we need more of that in order for us to actually be able to get to where energy is sufficient and also not too expensive.
I want to thank you very much, Mr. Shola Adekanye, for being with us on the program, and thank you for keeping yourself awake at 1 a.m. just so you can be here with us. And good luck with all the work you have ahead of you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.